Hey guys, it's your boy Rs, back at it again with another video. You already know what time it is. New patch equals new tier list. Be advised that I am not a theory crafter or a guide maker. This is my perspective as a 1000 plus day free-to-play player. Whether or not you agree with me or not is up to you. Now, the important note here is that this tier list is predicting where I believe these characters will be rated by the end of version 4.x, not how good they are currently. All characters are rated at E0S1, except the Trailblazer, who is rated at E6S0. Now, the important differences between my tier list and Pride Win are outlined here. Pause, take a look at this. Pause, take a look at this, and pause, take a look at this. With all that out the way, let's jump right into the tier list. Alright, so I want to get a few things out the way really quick. The first thing is that there's a lot happening here. So I am doing something I normally don't do, and I have my placements already pre-scripted, which I never do. If I were to do it naturally, I would end up overthinking shit, which is the reason why yesterday I already determined, hey, this is where these characters are going to go. Those are my determinations, and I'm going to put them where they're supposed to be from my perspective. Additionally, due to the fact that the Fate characters have been officially announced, there is a lot of information swirling about them, and I don't want to jump the gun too hard on them and put them too far up on the tier list. So if they're not where you think they should be, tough shit. I'm doing what I always do, which is I sit back, I wait to see what actually happens, what's official, what's legit, and once I have that, I'll adjust them accordingly. Do not whinge about placements for these characters. We'll get there when we get there. All right. Starting off with the sustains. As always, Aventurine, Luocha, and Phainon are all going into tier 1. They're all good for different reasons, but not good enough to be considered tier 0. They're pretty balanced sustain units, but with the existence of Hyacine, with the advent of our new HuoHuo, these units fall behind in those areas. Weirdly enough, Phainon actually got a weird use case where, because they're spamming all of these undispellable debuffs, she actually has gained value in this version specifically because for one instance, your whole team will be immune from it. So that's actually pretty cool. Something that I'm sure the developers didn't expect to happen in the future, but hey, it is what it is. That's what she's good for now. And Luocha and Aventurine still have their use cases. Luocha still has some of the highest pure healing in the game. Evernight can do some follow-ups and fits a little bit into the follow-up archetype, even though I wouldn't say that he's a best in slot there anymore. But they're all well-rounded, all solid. Hopefully these guys get some Nova Flares in the future. But until then, tier 1 is where they go. Next is HuoHuo. She goes in tier 0. Not really much of a debate to happen here. As I expected, since her Nova Flare, she has been performing pretty well for the average player. She has solid heals, she can cleanse, and the most important part of her kit, that ability to give your team energy, has been pretty valuable for a lot of players, and also is a good slot in for those that are running the Evernight battleship currently. I don't expect for her to drop out of tier 0. Again, if we were accounting for anomaly arbitration, then I would absolutely consider moving her down. But if I got to move her down, then I got to move effectively everybody down at the same time, which is the reason why I don't consider anomaly arbitration. The majority of players can't do it. There's no point for me accounting for it as my primary way of judging these characters, right? So for right now, within the standard modes, meaning MOC, Apocalyptic Shadow, and Pure Fiction, tier 0 is a pretty fair placement for her, and that's where she's going to go. Last but not least, Hyacine, the absolute GOAT sustain at the moment. Past 6 months that I have been tracking her data, she has been top 5 effectively everywhere. Really broken, really strong. If you don't own her at this point, I gotta question why. Like, what have you been spending your resources on that you don't own her at this point? Now, granted, if you literally just got into the game, then you're not going to own her. But if you've been playing the game for at least like a half a year or longer, I gotta question why you don't own this character. She's really good. She has utility outside of Mono-Remembrance. Unless they plan on dropping another sustain down the line that is effectively a second Hyacine, you're gonna wish that you had her. That's all I can really say at this point. Trailblazer tier is where she goes, and I don't think anyone is going to disagree with me on that placement. Next, let's talk about the amplifiers. First is going to be Cerydra, who I am demoting to tier 1. I have been observing her E0 data for a while now, and I was basically just waiting to see how she would play out in this version, and it has just gotten objectively worse over time. I have seen effectively no real improvements, so that's the reason why I have to demote her to tier 1. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of teams that she can be fully utilized, so that really hasn't helped her case here. It is what it is. Tier 1 is where she's going to go for now. Next, we got the Elation Trailblazer. As I've already explained, the reason why I have them here specifically is I think that compared to their previous Trailblazer form, they dramatically underperform. Unlike the Remembrance Trailblazer, who can slot into a bunch of different archetypes, this guy is basically stuck with Elation and doesn't have a lot of utility outside of that case. So obviously within the Elation comps and his current power level right now, he would be considered tier 0, but everywhere else he is pretty useless compared to the other universal options that we have in the game. And for that reason, I am not expecting them to be tier 0 by the time this version is over. If I had to guess, Pridewind might move them down to tier 0.5. Personally, from my perspective, it should be tier 1. But we're going to see how the data actually plays out, because we can't just use our personal opinions. We have to use our opinions along with the actual average player data in order to determine these placements. Right now, I'm expecting them to be tier 1. But as always, we got to wait and see how that plays out. Next, Robin. I demoted her out of Trailblazer tier and moved her into tier 1. I have been able to do some pretty great things with her since I've owned her, but the average player at E0 S1 has not been able to do well with her, and I can't really blame them 100% for that. I am hoping that she can start to improve with the existence of HuoHuo, especially with her being in the store now and being effectively free for everybody. But at the same time, I don't have a lot of faith that they'll be able to do that. So right now she's in tier 1. Like I said, hopefully she can move up, but I don't have a lot of faith in that. So tier 1 is where she's going to go. Obviously, if you get her E1, E2, she's going to be significantly better. But because of the level of difficulty there is in actually optimizing her, I don't think most players are going to be able to use her optimally. So tier 1, I think, is more than fair. Next, moving on to Silverwolf. Still tier 0.5. Still pretty solid all-around unit. But of course, with the existence of M-Blade, he is going to be holding priority for all of her quote-unquote best teams. But even outside those use cases, there is no harm, no foul in losing your 50-50 to her specifically. So I still, as always, am going to have her as being recommended for anyone who needs to put her in the 50-50 pool or considering to put her in the 50-50 pool. I still think that's a valid decision. But tier 0.5, solid all-around unit, just not as insane as the tier 0 units that I'm going to be going over in a bit. Next is Sunday. So we've heard a little bit more about him. Allegedly, he is going to be getting a Nova Flare, and the expectation is that he's going to be providing energy to the entire team as opposed to one unit. Furthermore, the other expectation is that his E1 is going to sort of become an unrestricted amplification as opposed to requiring a summon. So effectively, he will still provide these very good buffs, except it won't require the unit that you're buffing to have a summon in order to get the full potential, which I really hope is true, because one of the things that people were expecting is that he was going to be a best in slot in Remembrance. That was all the way back in version 2. And obviously that didn't really manifest itself. The only Remembrance unit that he takes to the next level is Aglaya, and that's about it. And his position in that team is questionable currently as well. Although, to be clear, for the average player, he is still the top rated support for her along with Cyrene. So if they make those changes and they actually improve him in that way, it's a possibility that he could move into tier 0, because being able to have 100% action advance on top of being able to provide energy for the entire team is pretty crazy. But we have to wait and see what happens. Going to put him in tier 0.5 for right now. Moving on. Next, we have Tribbie. Now Tribbie is in a very weird position, because effectively every single spot that she could be considered a best in slot has been made null, effectively. And I mean that in its entirety. I didn't think this was going to happen as fast as it did, but I did call it. I did predict that this was going to happen. So within Archer teams, there's legitimately no way that anybody can argue that she's going to be a best in slot there, because you have Sparkle, who is going to be mandatory with Archer, otherwise he underperforms. And M-Blade is just going to be objectively better due to the amount of damage that he can do and due to the amplification. So the only other teams that she can still be used on would be Herda teams and Ashveil teams, where she would be, you could even argue that she's the best in slot, or try to. But from my perspective, if you're running a Herda team, you would literally be better off running M-Blade at this point. So you could run Herda, Erudition unit, plus M-Blade. Or maybe you'll be able to use Herda plus M-Blade plus Tribbie and a sustain. Not 100% sure how that's going to play out. That's something that we have to sort of wait and see what people do before we make any clear determinations. But I do think that within those teams that M-Blade is better than her as well. And last but not least, follow-up teams. Obviously, the synergy between M-Blade, Ashveil, and Tribbie is going to be very good, but it is expected that another follow-up unit is going to be added, And once that happens, Tribbie is going to get booted off that team too. So it's up, really. I mean, it's pretty much over for her as being the quote unquote top of the top, cream of the crop. It's just not it. There's no way you could argue it at this point. I was trying to tell people last year that stuff like this was going to happen. I said at best she was going to be a best in slot in 1 or 2 teams, and people thought that I was crazy for saying that. It is what it is. As a matter of fact, and literally the last video that I made, the last tier list that I made, I said that it was disingenuous that she was tier 0 in all modes. And what did Pride do? They demoted her in Memory of Chaos and Apocalyptic Shadow, demoted her to tier 0.5, which is exactly what I expected them to do. When I saw it, I was like, yep. Based off of the data that I have been looking at, I've been looking at their data. Obviously, they're looking at the same data that I'm looking at. In those modes, she's fallen off. It is what it is. So she's had one of the fastest fall-offs that I have ever seen for someone who's supposed to be a quote-unquote universal top 1 GOAT that I've ever seen. This is the fastest one I've seen. Because Ruan Mei was top 3 for 2 years. Robin was top 3 for a year. Tribbie was top 3 for 9 to 10 months. Basically, after Cyrene came out and Dahlia came out, it just only was downhill from there. And I don't see how she is going to be revived from here on out. I don't see how she's going to get revived in a tier 0. I don't think that M Blade is going to revive her in a tier 0. But we'll see what happens, right? For the time being, tier 0.5 is more than fair. Next is Ruan Mei, who also got demoted out of Trailblazer tier. She has been improving in her average clearance for most players, but it's not enough to keep her in Trailblazer tier, obviously, and it's definitely not enough to keep her in tier 0. Between her, Tribbie, and Robin, it's pretty close in Apocalyptic Shadow. In Pure Fiction, Tribbie completely stomps both of them out. It doesn't matter what investment level. They just don't do well in Pure Fiction. Talking about Ruan Mei and Robin specifically. And in Memory of Chaos, at E0, the gap between Tribbie and Robin is substantial. And the difference between Tribbie and Ruan Mei is, I would say, it's like middle of the road. There have been instances within the past 6 months where Ruan Mei has actually passed Tribbie in some patches, but it hasn't been consistent. It was for 2 months. I think it was January and February. And since then, she's kind of been lagging behind. But at the very least, she got some sort of boon from Dahlia's existence. People were expecting that, you know, we could just throw Ruan Mei out effectively. She wasn't going to have any real use cases once Dahlia came out, where it's not really true. Weirdly enough, Fugue seems to be the more common unit that gets thrown out of the team because she doesn't provide as much as Ruan Mei does. That's the first problem. And if you don't have her at E2 plus, talking about Fugue, then you will be much better off using an E1 or an E2 Ruan Mei. Well, not so much E2 because E2 doesn't really do anything. You'll be much better off using an E1 Ruan Mei. So I don't know whether or not she is going to be able to move up. I expect that she'll stay at tier 0.5 overall. But Pride has her rated overall a bit lower than what I have her at. Based off of the data that I've looked at, I think that tier 0.5 is pretty fair. I think tier 0.5 and MOC and tier 0.5 for Apocalyptic Shadow and tier 1 for Pure Fiction. So that would be tier 0.5 overall. So tier 0.5 is where she's going to go. Next is going to be Mordenax Blade, who is going to be tier 0. For Amplifier, and is being moved up to tier 0 for sub-DPS. He has well exceeded my expectations. This is going to be the most disgusting universal amplifier that the developers have ever added to the game. Well beyond anything that has come before him. And I don't know if anything could come after him that wouldn't completely break the game. This guy is insane at base and only becomes massively better at E1 and E2. It's literally just straight gains. I am going to be getting him, which I know sounds like it would be impossible. It would be impossible as a free-to-play player. But that's a conversation that we got to have in another video because I don't want to talk about that right now. But I am going to be grabbing him. He is insanely good. He is going to be a permanent best in slot in Pure Fiction in a way that Robin and Tribbie cannot replicate. And I think there are a lot of units that he is going to be able to drag up in viability just due to his sheer overall strength. If you're going to be getting him, from my perspective, you should try to get his E1 at the bare minimum. But even at E0, he's just going to revive a lot of characters. Simply put, he's insanely good, insanely strong, and I can't really articulate how strong he is without spending literally 20 minutes on him alone. And I can't do that with this format of video because that would make this video, it would make it too long, right? Right now, tier 0 sub-DPS, tier 0 amplifier. That's where he's going to go. Next, we got Sparkle, who goes into tier 0. I am pretty confident that she is going to stay in tier 0. And the reason why is because Archer is going to be getting a buff, and he was already pretty strong even at E0. And now with these new Fate units that are coming out, I mean, she's pretty much solidified herself as being mandatory in Archer teams. And with the new support that's going to be coming for Archer, she's going to stay there. And that's fine, because even as a universal option, she's pretty solid. But her highest frequency use case is most likely going to be within Archer teams. And D-Hill potentially is also going to be getting a Nova Flare, which is just going to improve her value even further. So with all that said, I wasn't sure 100% if she was going to remain in tier 0. Now I'm pretty confident that she is. So tier 0 is where she goes. Next, Yao Guang. All right. She's coming back. I was not expecting Yao Guang to rerun this quickly, which is the reason why I couldn't fully recommend that anybody pull for Evanesha or Superwolf without owning her. But I guess because the developers realized that some people will be coming into the game because of the anniversary units and because of Evanesha, they had to rerun Yao Guang so that those players who picked her up will be able to use their full power without essentially waiting another 2 to 3 months. So Yao Guang's rerunning. We've gone over this. This is the 3rd time now. All right. If you're running Elation, you must pull this unit. Simple as. I don't know who started this bullshit with her being quote unquote bait. I don't know who started it. I don't care. They were wrong. Insane amounts of copium. Yao Guang was very obviously going to be a best in slot for Elation from the jump. If you chose not to believe, you better believe now. So, she's coming out again. You're getting your second chance. Grab her now so that your Elation carries can actually perform to their full potential. Cool? Cool. Tier 0 is where she goes. Next, we got the Dahlia. I mean, I've already glazed her enough as is, but in case I wasn't clear enough, still insanely good, insanely strong. Put Super Break on her back. She's just a really strong amplifier unit. If you're going to be running Super Break, you basically need her in order for your teams to function. Without her, all of your Super Break units are going to underperform. No other way of looking at it. It is what it is. Tier 0 is where I'm going to put her. Last but not least, Cyrene. Now, there are a lot, and I mean an insane amount of truly, truly foolish people who think that somehow, some way, that Cyrene is going to fall off, that she doesn't have high pull value. These people are utterly delusional and are so fucking mad. They're so upset that their predictions that Tribbie was going to be the GOAT were completely wrong. Like, you have to put it in perspective for these Cyrene haters. You have to put this in perspective. They spent basically the entirety of version 3 telling anybody who would listen that Tribbie was going to be the GOAT. And literally not even 7 months later, Tribbie started falling off. And Cyrene, since her release, has had some of the highest average player clearance data. Period. This is not even a debate. It's not even a question. I already tracked the data. Every single patch, every single version, Cyrene has been beyond Tribbie. She's been beyond Ruan Mei, Robin, whoever you can think of. She has been beyond effectively everybody. The Mono-Remembrance team in its current state has been a #1 team across MOC, Pure Fiction, and Apocalyptic Shadow for 6 months straight on at least one side. E2 Evernight, even if you take this and you go to the top 1% of players in the game, Cyrene plus E2 Evernight, they have been 7 costs, 0 cycling, or with even lower costs. They've been doing it even lower costs. 0 cycling the king since release. I've seen 4 costs, 5 costs, 6 costs. Highest cost I've seen is 7. And for some reason, you still have a small minority of the player base who continues to disrespect Cyrene. And it honestly is just blind hatred. There's no data to suggest that Cyrene is bad. And you already know, without any shadow of a doubt, that with the more Eidolons that you add to her, the much more useful that she becomes. I have, for perspective, as a free-to-play player, I have sustainless 3-star cleared the king 2 times in a row. Well, not in a row, but I've done it twice. if I ask any free-to-play player out there, have you been able to do a sustainless clear against the king? Against the hardest content in the game? If I ask you, well, have you? 99% of you is going to say no. But for some reason, Cyrene continues to be disrespected. But that's okay. Because unlike these Cyrene haters, I'm not basing my opinion off of just my personal feelings and blind hatred. I actually look at data. Cyrene haters don't care about data. They don't. They just take their personal opinion, which is something they did back in version 3. They said that she was going to be the GOAT. They said she was going to be best in slot in Elation. They said she was going to be best in slot in Castorice teams. They said she was going to be better in Mono-Rem than Cyrene, and they were wrong on all fronts. And they continue to be wrong, but they keep yapping. They can't help themselves. And I'm blaming this primarily on the sort of Reddit sect of the community who do nothing but talking, but you never see them play the game. A lot of these people that do all this talking, they don't play the game. I'm being honest. They do more of their effort on this game is them actually typing and talking about it instead of actually playing. But those are the people that other players listen to. It's insane. It's truly insane. You can literally, we have a site, not one site, we have 2 sites for you to reference for player data. You have Pride Win for average player data. You have the Herder archive for top 1% player data. And these players don't look at either. They don't want to. It's not that they can't, they don't want to, because if you look at the data and you compare Cyrene to, you can compare her to anybody for the past 6 months. And she has been beyond the majority for 6 months. Top 3 across the board for 6+ months straight. So there's no reasoning people out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. You understand? I cannot reason a Cyrene hater out of their position when they didn't reason themselves into it. There's no reason for it. There's no rationale behind it. It is just pure blind hatred. When I disrespected, quote unquote, disrespected Tribbie, I gave you reasons for it. I gave you nearly 2 hours of reasoning for it. Perspectives from other theory crafters. Giving you historical precedents for it. Giving you my personal experience. I gave you all 3. And guess who ended up being accurate about Tribbie? Me. When the majority of content creators were bad-mouthing Cyrene, when they were saying that Tribbie was going to be beyond her, I was one of the only content creators who actually articulated long-form content. Matter of fact, I might be the only one. The only person long-form content is still on my channel if anybody wants to go back and watch it. When every content creator, for the most part, was shitting on her, saying they couldn't recommend her, saying that she wasn't going to have high value in the future, I was the only person who took long-form content and went through every single, when I say every single counter argument against Cyrene, every talking point, I went through every single one of them and explained point by point why it was stupid. No other content creator did that except me. Nobody. So if you want to continue to listen to these people who ignore data, you don't see them play the game, and continue to disrespect Cyrene, if you want to listen to those guys, that's on you. I'm going to keep doing me. I know I'm getting E2 Cyrene. I've been showing the potential of DPS Cyrene ever since I released her. or ever since her release. And with that E2, and even with the use cases with Ruan Mei and now E2 Robin, it's only going to be up from here. I know there are a lot of people that they so desperately want Cyrene to fall off. They need it to happen because they spent 6+ months lying about her. They must have it happen. It has to. Because you spent all this effort downplaying her, they're going to continue to double and triple down because they don't want to be wrong. Me, if I'm wrong about a unit, I'll say, shit, my bad. These Cyrene haters can't do it. They can't afford to. I want to be clear for anyone who is just don't understand. The second strongest ice DPS in this game is Cyrene. Not joking. Dead serious. And with Eidolons, even if we were to go E1 Evernight to E1 Cyrene, a well-built E1 Cyrene is out-damaging Evernight, period. And it's not until you get to E2 that it becomes a different story. So the second strongest is Cyrene. And once I unshackle myself, stop having my hands behind my back for this account, you're going to see what I'm talking about. I try to prove it. People don't want to listen. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing at this point. Cannot reason people out of a position they did not reason themselves into. Trailblazer tier. 6 months of pure top 3 dominance. Expected to continue. Next, let's go over the sub-DPS. First, Argenti. Allegedly, he is supposed to be getting a Nova Flare. But even outside of that, I think that M-Blade is legitimately so strong, along with this new HuoHuo, that unironically, I think that he deserves to go up a tier. I think that he should start performing better with M-Blade. And I'm hoping that a lot of players are going to be picking up M-Blade because of just how strong he is, even though his niche obviously is going to be within follow-up teams. For AoE teams, he's still going to be pretty good. So, hopefully, he gets that Nova Flare. And hopefully, M-Blade allows him to go up a little bit. But at the same time, not expecting people to just suddenly drop everything they're doing and just start using Argenti. But maybe a few players will. So I'm going to put him in tier 2. Next is Topaz and Numby, who I'm also moving up by a half a tier, because allegedly they're supposed to be getting a Nova Flare as well. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know that between Moranax Blade and a Nova Flare, logically she should move up. Now, for both Argenti and Topaz and Numby, I don't know how good they're going to become, so I don't want to ramp them up too far, but I do want to adjust them up slightly to reflect my optimism that they'll improve. So I think that's more than fair for both. And the elephants in the room. the continuation of the Unlimited Blade Works collab. Rin Tohsaka and Gilgamesh. Now, as I said earlier, do not get mad about my placements. I don't know 100% what these guys are going to do, and I don't even know what their damn kit looks like. All right? I'm not jumping the gun and putting them in tier 0 yet until I see what exactly they do. Now, what I can tell you, based off of what I've heard thus far, is Rin is going to be a sub DPS for Archer, and Gilgamesh is going to be a sub DPS for Saber. If that's true, that is going to be amazing. Now, I know there are some people that are not happy about Gilgamesh potentially being a sub DPS for Saber. However, if you look at this canonically, one of the biggest Saber glazers is actually Gilgamesh. Not even kidding. He's a big Saber. He's a glazer. Straight up. She is one of the few people that he actually respects. So although Saber doesn't particularly like him, he does like her. So I know that some people would prefer for him to be a main DPS, and I get that. That's valid. That's what I expected too. But I would not be opposed to him being a sub DPS, because with all of the DPS that we have in this game, I want you to look. This, you see what I'm circling? This is just a small part of the DPS in this game. Having another main DPS being added it's ridiculous. It's gotten out of hand. And a lot of the main DPS that have released have not been aging well. You basically have a small subset of main DPS that are being used by the majority of players. And for me specifically, as someone who has used Saber and I very much like Saber, I'm going to grab him for free, and I'm most likely going to put Eidolons into him if he actually is a sub DPS, because I would love to be able to use both at once. And my Saber has nobody who is a dedicated support for her at this time. The closest thing she got was Cyrene, and with Gilgamesh, if he actually is a sub DPS and going to be the dedicated support, then Cyrene can be taken out of another team and be used elsewhere, which is fine, because her being on Saber teams was copium to begin with, right? Now she can actually be used with who she was meant to be used with, which is Chrysalis Air teams and Mono-Remembrance. So I would not be opposed to him being a sub DPS at all. It doesn't make a difference to me either way. The one other thing that's weird about Rin is that damn blade that she's holding. That is not in Unlimited Blade Works. I know, because I watched Unlimited Blade Works like fucking the entire thing like 3 times. So I've watched Fate Zero. I watched Phase State Night to I think it was 20. Which version? It's like 2011 or something like that. That's probably wrong. I haven't watched it in a very long time. And then there's Unlimited Blade Works, right? Never had this blade. That is from Heaven's Field. So they're going to have to provide an explanation as to why she has that goddamn blade for an Unlimited Blade Works collab. Doesn't make any sense to me. Also, this outfit that he has here as well is definitely not. It's definitely not the Unlimited Blade Works version of him either. He looks more caster-ish right now in his design. But they still look really cool. I'm very excited for this. I didn't want to jump the gun and talk about them before HoYoverse officially confirmed it. That's the reason why in my other tier list I said don't talk about him or talk about that big surprise until we got official confirmation. Now that we got it, I can talk about it. We're good. I'm going to be pulling both because I like Archer and I like Saber. So that's the way it is. That's what I'm going to be doing. Tier 0.5 for now. We'll see what their kit looks like probably in a couple weeks. I hope. Next, Ashveil, who I am moving back up to tier 0 as a sub DPS. And I'm placing as tier 0.5 as a main DPS. Now, the reason why I'm upping him as a sub DPS is because, obviously, his new best buddy, Mordenax Blade, is about to release. And the synergy between those two is outrageous. Now, to be clear, I'm fully aware that Ashveil is going to be tier 0 once Mordenax Blade releases as a main and sub. I know that, right? I think because another follow-up unit is going to be coming out that's going to be stronger than Ashveil, I think they're going to be tier 0 as a main DPS, and that's the reason why I put Ashveil as tier 0.5 as a main DPS. But as a sub DPS, both him and Mordenax Blade are going to be tier 0 definitively, especially for follow-up. And you can also splash them, weirdly enough, into Acheron teams. And if you don't decide to pull that new tier 0 main DPS for follow-up, you can also use Feixiao there. So, tier 0 sub DPS, tier 0.5 main DPS. Don't want to talk too much about it because I'm going to get too excited. I'm going to calm down. That's where I'm going to put them. Moving on. Next, in order to save myself some time, I'm just going to put Kafka, Sparksy, and Black Swan in tier 0. As always, Kafka is the glue for the dot art type, has allowed it to be very competitive as a top 4 art type in the game, and with the Nova Flare of Black Swan, the team has become even better. For Sparksy, still going to be a best in slot within Silverwolf's premium team, so she will continue to perform well there. However, as a main DPS, still putting her in tier 0.5 because I don't think that she is going to be anywhere close to the high-performing Evanesha and Silverwolf. I think that's pretty fair. Going to move on from this. Of course, I got to put Evernight in Trailblazer tier for both sub DPS and main DPS. Now, I want to be clear about something. As a sub DPS, Evernight has been doing exceptionally well for 6+ months, even at E0S1. As a main DPS, her performance has suffered a bit in Memory of Chaos. Not going to deny that. However, in Apocalyptic Shadow and Pure Fiction, she is still really, really, really good, even as a main DPS at E0S1. She has been pretty close to Castorice and the other top 5 DPS currently, and that's the reason why she's still going to be Trailblazer tier. Now, for the video that I wanted to release already, and I didn't release it yet, and there is a reason why I haven't. There's been a lot of shit going on for me personally that I don't want to talk about here. I'm going to show you guys the differences between her and Castorice, and moving forward, the experiment that I've been doing on my end, the data collection, I'm going to start using that so that you can actually see the justification for what makes a unit Trailblazer tier, so that it makes more sense for those that are interested in why I put those units there. I will provide an explanation, hopefully sooner rather than later. But for her data, Pure Fiction, easily top 5 in the game. Apocalyptic Shadow, easily top 5 in the game. So for both DPS and sub-DPS, easy Trailblazer tier. The only place where she has seen even a little bit of a drop-off is MOC, which has been pretty substantial from an E0 perspective. But because she's still really good in Pure Fiction and Apocalyptic Shadow, that's why she stays in Trailblazer tier. Doesn't need to be top of the line, across the board in all 3 modes. She just has to be better than the majority at all 3 modes, which she is. So, Trailblazer tier is where I'm going to put her. And here we go, the most annoying part of this video, and it always is placing all of these goddamn DPS. And this is the reason why I basically had to script where I put these guys from a placement perspective, because otherwise I would spend too much time overthinking where I'm going to put these guys. So because I've already thought through it, I can go through this pretty quickly. For tier 2, we have Jing Yuan and D-Hill. Now, Jing Yuan supposedly is supposed to be getting a Nova Flare, but D-Hill is somewhat questionable. I don't know how accurate that is. And also, if they Nova Flare him, I don't know how much he's actually going to improve. I think that I have enough information that if they were to Nova Flare Jing Yuan, and then also simultaneously Nova Flare Sunday, he should go up at least a tier. At least. So that he would be in tier 2. D-Hill, kind of questioning, because there are so many other DPS in the game that he's competing with. It's not the same as sub-DPS, where it's a very small subset of characters that you're competing with. DPS is a completely different story. There are more DPS in this game than any other classification, character-wise. I'm going to put them both in tier 2 for right now. And we're going to see how they perform once they get these enhancements that they're supposed to get. I'm hoping that they are able to at least be brought up to tier 1.5 and in best case tier 1. But that might be hoping for a bit too much. Tier 2 is where I'm going to put them for now. For tier 1.5, moving up is Blade and Jinglu. So, I think that Mordernax Blade is not only going to be advantageous for follow-up, certain AoE teams, but I also think for any HP scaling teams. And that's the thing that I think some people are missing. Obviously, people were treating Tribbie like an HP support, despite the fact that she doesn't do anything for HP teams. It's just she has a big HP pool, so HP support. Hyacine is actually the HP support because she increases the max HP of everybody on the team along with her healing potential. She is the real reason why after Nova Flare, Blade and Jinglu are able to perform anywhere, even remotely decently. I think with the existence of Mordenax Blade that these units should start to perform even better. I actually decided to pull them out. I pulled them out of the closet, brushed the dust off of them, and I started testing them a little bit, changed their builds around, especially for Jinglu. I vastly changed her build around to being basically purely HP focused, and I used her with Sunday, Ruan Mei, and Hyacine. And I was surprised at what I saw. She was actually doing much better than I thought she would. I was testing her in Mach 11, to be clear. But she did way better than what I expected. Blade as well. But Jinglu specifically did way better than I expected. And I have both of them at E1. And I'm like, let me test them in Mach 12. Mach 12, they both struggled pretty badly. But they did well before they went into the next main phase. So basically, against the elites, they both did decently well. They either cleared in like 2 or 3 cycles, which is not terrible. I know that might seem bad to those that are used to clearing it in 1 or 0. But for these units, I thought that's not that bad. I was like, if they can do that, then if they get an upscale for an amplifier, someone that can actually do DPS and supplement them and help them do better, I think that you could justifiably move them up a half a tier. I think they might get into a position where instead of when they get to Mach 12, usually they're clearing in anywhere from 6 to 10 cycles, unless you have them both at like E2 plus. I'm talking about specifically, obviously, like E1, E0. I think that E1, E0, it's a possibility that those clearance times might have with the existence of Mordenax Blade. I'm going to test it once he comes out. But I was between those two, I was very, very impressed with Jinglu. Doing much better than I thought she would. Again, it was only Mach 11. I know that. But if she can do that, and then also in Mach 12, she was able to clear the elites in like 2 cycles, I think with Mordenax Blade, I think that she'll be able to perform much better. So I'm moving them both up half a tier. I'm hoping that they can get a little bit more meta viability with his existence, so I'm going to be moving them to tier 1.5. Now, on the other hand, the 2 units that I have to demote is Rappa and Boothill. This is not something that I wanted to do, and it's not something that I take pleasure in. They have been performing pretty poorly at E0, unfortunately. And there's no other way of looking at it aside from they have to come down. In Pure Fiction, obviously, they're both not doing great. So the only 2 places where you would expect any real performance is in Memory of Chaos, where they also have been performing great, and then Apocalyptic Shadow. Now, allegedly, Fugue is supposed to be getting a buff, and Lingsha is supposed to be getting a buff. Until I see what those buffs are, I'm putting them in tier 1.5 for now. Hopefully I can move them back up or maybe even further beyond that once those buffs come into existence. But right now, things are no es bueno for these guys. So they've unfortunately been demoted to tier 1.5. Yunli, who I actually recently just got out of my 50-50. She's doing okay. She's not doing great by any stretch of the imagination. With the existence of HuoHuo in the store, and with the expectation that Sunday is going to be Nova flared, maybe she can come out of this tier 1.5 hellhole that she's been stuck in. But counter units are just not performing well because there's no way to force the counters right now. Like, the counter archetype you would think would be good in this game because you can't dodge, right? All attacks that are fired, they have to land against somebody. But the problem is that units like Yunli are reliant on the enemy having high attack frequency or high AoE attack frequency to get those targets so that you can follow up and do decent damage. And sometimes, especially with the advent of these other new mecha enemies who sometimes they just don't attack you, they just sit there and then they counter you, it's not great for units like Yunli. I'm hoping that they'll actually drop some sort of counter support in the future. Weirdly enough, because of these weird elation modifiers where those little balls drop and they do like 1 damage to your whole team, I actually tested it. It can trigger Yunli's counters when she activates her ult. I thought that was crazy, but it did work. So maybe they could drop a unit specifically that not only boosts counter damage, but forces counters to activate. Basically does like 1 damage to the team, kind of like that passive that modifier does, and force the counters out even if the enemy is not actively attacking. Will something like that come into existence? Maybe. Who knows? But we gotta wait and see. Until that day, tier 1.5 is where Yunli goes. Now, for tier 1. First is going to be Seele. I think Seele is doing alright. I don't want to jump the gun and demote her to tier 1.5 just yet. She is being watch listed. I want to be clear. But I think that she has been doing pretty well in pure fiction with the right setup. And in certain cases, in Memory of Chaos, she can do decently well. And Apocalyptic Shadow, pretty questionable because she doesn't have a high break efficiency. So it's kind of a stretch to attempt to use her there due to how large those toughness bars are. But I think that within Pure Fiction and MOC that she will do decently enough to stay in tier 1 for right now. But I am going to watch list her. And if her E0 performance just continues to dive, Then I'll demote her into tier 1.5, maybe even lower than that. I hope I don't have to do that. But for right now, we're going to put her in tier 1. Maybe with the existence of Mordenax's blade, maybe she gets to stay here. Maybe he covers some of her weaknesses. We got to wait it out and see what happens. So, tier 1 is where I'm going to put her. Next, Phainon. Now, for the Phainon fanboys, you may not be happy with this placement, but I don't really care. At E0, it's just been downhill, man. There's nothing else I can really say about it. He's an E2 merchant. No E2, and he's not doing great. Now, he is a garbage collector, in that you can take some random amplifiers that you have laying around and use them with him. But it's not enough to keep him from falling off. It's just not enough. And although Cyrene exists, at E0, the synergy between the two is pretty bad. I don't know what the developers were smoking when they thought of that. I don't know why they did this. It's not good because it takes too long to build up her ult, and then it also takes up too much time to build up his ult. So that's not great. So you're literally better off getting him at E2 first before you even think about getting Cyrene for him. Crazy, out of all the DPS to have shitty synergy with Cyrene, it has to be him. If you have her at E2, then it's a different conversation, and it actually becomes pretty good to pair the two together. But if you don't have E2 Cyrene, and you don't have E2 Phainon, things are looking bleak if you're a Phainon main right now. And you guys know that, right? So for the time being, I'm putting it in tier 1. I have been observing him for the past 6 months, and he has not been doing too hot at E0. Memory of Chaos, Copium, Pure Fiction, just hell no. Terrible in Pure Fiction. Horrible. Legitimately horrible. And then in Apocalyptic Shadow, he does okay. So tier 1 is where I'm going to put him. Next, just going to rate these guys at the same time. Feixiao and Acheron. These two are part of the reason why I'm going to be going for Mordenax's Blade, because I love both of these units. But I am expecting that these units will improve with the existence of Mordenax's Blade. That is what I anticipate. Will it be enough to put them in tier 0.5, tier 0? I would hope so. But I don't have a lot of faith in the average player. Just being honest. I don't know whether or not anyone's going to pull Mordenax's Blade for these guys specifically, unless they really like these units. And I don't know whether or not at E0 or E0S1, whether or not people will be able to fully utilize Mordenax's Blade to provide the necessary data to allow us to move them up to tier 0.5. Because we can't just base it off of the best players performing. You do need to consider the average player. And to be clear, there are 19 million players who play this game. The majority are very average. Very average. And that's the reason why I had to make adjustments for my favorite characters, because even though I can perform well with Ruan Mei and Robin, although I can perform well with Acheron and Feixiao, it doesn't matter if the average player doesn't. And if you start adjusting data to only be around the top players in the game, it's going to skew the placement of every single character in the game. So I'm putting them both in tier 1 for right now. I think they will get a substantial boost from the existence of Mordenak's Blade. I think it will be considerable, but then the question remains, is the data going to change to actually reflect these improvements? Guess we gotta wait and see what happens. Tier 1 is where they're going to go for right now. Watch listing them both. Potential for them to go up to tier 0.5. Next, we got Saber. And we got Archer. They are also being watch listed as tier 0.5, potential to go up to tier 0. I am the type of person that likes to wait and actually see the changes in data before I start moving everyone up too preemptively. I want to wait and see what happens. Now, I was somewhat questioned in my last tier list. People were saying, I don't understand why you have Saber, as an example, as a comfort pool. I don't know why you have her in tier 0.5. Yada, yada, yada. The reason why I had them in tier 0.5 initially was because I was expecting that there was going to be dedicated supports to come out for both Saber and Archer. I just wasn't 100% sure, and I didn't want to jump the gun and do too much, right? And just put them in tier 0 off rip. I do that so basically we don't hype ourselves up and then get disappointed when things fall short of expectation. So putting both Archer and Saber in tier 0.5 was my way of tempering expectation, right? Because my last tier list, one of the problems that I had was that I was not tempering expectations and I jumped the gun on some characters and I put some characters too high. I had some characters too low. So for right now, they're both going to be in tier 0.5, watch listed with the expectation that they will go to tier 0 once we have the full kits for Rin and Gilgamesh, and hopefully they're very, very powerful so that these two units can finally be at their full potential. That's the hope. And for Saber specifically, if Sunday gets Nova flared, right? And we're talking like a sparkle level Nova flare on top of having the HuoHuo Nova flare that we got. That should be pretty crazy for Saber. And given that Sparkle is already nuts for Archer, then on top of that, we got Mordenak's Blade, who is coming out. That's going to be nuts for him. And then he also, weirdly enough, can use HuoHuo or DHPT. It depends on what you're trying to do. I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope that these units will improve to tier 0. But I gotta wait and see what the data looks like. Because the data for both of these guys right now is not too hot from an average player data perspective. So I'm hoping that I can Once these 2 units release, I can justify putting them in tier 0. Tier 0.5 for now. Moving on. Next. Himeko Nova. So, I was not sure if she was going to actually be real. I wasn't sure. I was thinking maybe there was some copium going on and somebody was missing the plot, right? But no, she is very real. And I think she's going to be very, very strong. Allegedly, she is supposed to be a main push for this version on the level of Silverwolf 999, which is kind of crazy to think about. She would basically be this version's Phainon. Now, normally that would be cause for panic because I just put Phainon in tier 1. However, she is supposed to have good synergy with the Astral Express members. There's a lot of them, and they're also very good. So you have DHPT, you have Welt, who was just recently Nova flared, right? We have potentially Sunday, who might get Nova flared. There's a lot of things that you could do there with just those 3 units alone. But it all boils down to what her kit looks like. If her kit is designed in the same way that Phainon's was designed, I do not have a lot of faith in this unit. I think that Phainon is fundamentally flawed in the way that he was designed. The biggest issue is that he kicks his damn teammates off of his team. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. They didn't have to do that. They could have done a dimension shift without doing that, like they did for Castorice. But it is what it is. We can't go back into the past and change anything. So if they do something similar for her, but without kicking the teammates off the team, then obviously she's going to have a much higher ceiling than Phainon. So effectively, I think that Phainon was the prototype and Himeko Nova is the actual final product. That's the reason why he's basically an E2 merchant and his problems don't really get resolved until you get that E2. Whereas I think that at E0, she is going to be a substantially stronger unit. That's just my perspective. That's what I think. And based off of the Nova flares that have already happened and the Nova flares that I expect to happen, I think that she's going to be in tier 0. So that's where I'm going to put her for now. Moving on. Next, Hysilens. Not a lot to say here for her, right? She has been performing pretty well. Dot itself has been performing very well. And them running in tandem with each other has allowed them to be a top 4 archetype. And the most amazing part is that with Cyrene rerunning, for those that were interested in doing the dot split, you can do that. Just letting you know, giving you a heads up. If you really, really like dot, you absolutely should pull Cyrene. Because you can, without question, run Hysilens, Cyrene, Flex, Sustain, then Black Swan, Kafka, Flex, Sustain. And those 2 teams will perform well. Just giving you a heads up. Dot is looking pretty good right now. And with Cyrene, it looks even better. Moving on. Next is Firefly. Not a lot to say about her. One of HuoHuo's favorite children. With the existence of Dahlia, she is very easily tier 0. And with the expectation that Fugue is going to be Nova Flared, and Lingsha, she is most likely going to be definitive tier 0 for the remainder of this version. I am expecting that the final premium team for Super Break, and thus Firefly, is going to be her, plus Dahlia, plus Fugue, plus Lingsha. But of course, if you decide that you don't want to use Lingsha, even after the Nova Flare, you can slot Ruan Mei in that last slot. You can slot Mordenak's Blade in that last slot if that's something you want to do. Or you can slot the Harmony Trailblazer in that final slot. Depends on what you want to use. So yeah, I don't see her falling out of tier 0. That would be effectively impossible with the information that I have thus far and the data that I've looked at thus far. So tier 0 is where she goes. Last but not least, we got Evanesha. And we got Superwolf. Both very powerful units, have been doing exceedingly well thus far, especially with all the elation shilling. So the real test is going to come once that elation shilling ends, and we have to see who is actually the better of the two. I've already said that I think that Evanesha is going to be the better of the two, but their ceiling is only going to move up from here because there are 2 other elation units that are expected to release for the final premium elation team, which is going to be built around Superwolf, and Evanesha effectively is going to be taking the leftovers from that. However, because I think that Evanesha has the higher ceiling of the two, I believe that Evanesha is going to be able to take better advantage of those scraps than Superwolf will be able to as the main push for elation. Of course, this could change at any time because the developers are not averse to intentionally making weird synergistic changes so that the units that they're creating may, on some level, not be as optimal with Evanesha as they are with Superwolf. They've already done that with Super Break, and we saw it. That's the reason why I have Rappa and Boothill in tier 1.5 and why I have Firefly in tier 0. That clearly is by design. If they wanted Rappa and Boothill to be better than they are currently, it would not be hard for them to make the changes necessary to allow them to get closer to Firefly. But for some reason, despite Firefly already having a better usage case than those 2 units, she got the Nova Flare before they did. So it's very much a possibility that the new units for elation will do more for Superwolf than Evanesha. As a matter of fact, I would bet on it. And for that reason, it's a possibility that even though I think Evanesha's potential is higher, that Superwolf might end up performing better overall. But as always, we got to wait and see what happens. Last but not least, we have Castorice. And as I've already said, over the past 6 months, she has been performing very well. Castorice has been slightly beyond main DPS Evernight in MOC, Pure Fiction, and even Apocalyptic Shadow. And as I already said, the differences between these two units does not become pronounced until you get E2. But even at E2, I just want to be clear, Castorice is still competitive. Of course, if we're looking at the top 1% of players, the difference is pretty vast. But for the average player, and this is an average player tier list, I'm trying to account for as many perspectives as humanly possible, she's pretty close. So Trailblazer tier is more than acceptable. And that's where she's going to go. All right, let's move on to the pool recommendations. As always, my pool recommendations are based on my experience and perspective as a free-to-play player. The pool value here is also considering the character ratings from the previous list. This tier list includes their Eidolon value up to E2 max. Ultimately, you, the person watching this, must determine on your own whether or not you're going to listen to these recommendations, because I don't know what's on your account, right? I can only provide general guidance. I can't provide super specific guidance unless I know what's on your account. And even in those cases, my perspective is going to be different from yours, most likely, because we don't think the same. It's the reason why I always recommend that you don't just listen to me specifically. You should probably get different perspectives from other content creators. So with that being said, these are the pool ratings. And once you've read that, let's move on. Okay. For luxury pool for sustains, we're just going to go ahead and put Fu Xuan and Luocha into the slot. Unchanged. I still have HuoHuo as a must pull as long as she is in that store, which is effectively forever. For Amplifier, still have Silverwolf, Ruan Mei, and Robin being in should pull because they're free. But as I've said before, I think that the priority for newer players should be getting stronger sustains as opposed to worrying about amplifiers, because you need to have 2 strong sustains minimum in order to clear in-game content. So that's the reason why I have her rated so high compared to these guys, right? All right. It's the moment that you've all been waiting for. Yao Guang, Cyrene, and Mordenax Blade, for the first time since I've started doing these tier lists, are all simultaneously going to be rated as must pulls for different reasons, completely different reasons. So as I've already said plenty of times, if you see this tier list, right, without listening to my perspective, you're not going to be able to understand why I put them where I put them. So if you look at the final version of tier list, without listening to what I have to say about them first, don't fucking comment on why I put them there. If you listen, you'll know why I put them there. Right? For elation teams, Yao Guang is a must pull. This isn't optional. If you do not pull her for your elation teams, your teams are going to underperform, period. You're not going to be able to fix it with just vertically investing in your carries. You're not going to be able to just fix it by getting an E2 on Evanesha. You're not going to be able to fix it just by getting an E2 on Superwolf. You must have her on the team. So, if you're interested in elation, and you already own at least one of the two main carries, you must pull this unit. Otherwise, you're going to have your teams underperform for the near future. You can stop at E0 or E0S1. I'm not saying you got to go to E1 or E2 if you don't want to, but you should at the very least have her at E0. Of course, if you don't care about elation, then she's a skip, because she doesn't have a lot of use cases outside of elation. Before, her other use case was within archer teams, right? But I think Mortal Axe Blade is going to be taking both Tribbie and her slot there, which is fine by me. I don't really care. So now she can definitively stay within her elation teams. So for those reasons, she is going to be a must pull. For Mortal Axe Blade, this dude is insane. I could spend 20 minutes glazing him. His amp is so far beyond anything that we've seen. It is ridiculous. The potential that he has, the damage that he does, his ability to taunt, his ability to resurrect dead characters. All of those play a factor into me putting him as a must pull. If you're somebody who cares about HP scaling teams, I think that you should pull this character. Now, there are some weird instances where there is anti-synergy between him and some other characters, primarily with Maide. I would say primarily it's with Maide. There's some anti-synergy there a little bit because you would prefer Maide to get hit, but because of his taunt value, I'm not 100% sure how well that's going to work out. I do think that within Jinglu teams, I think that within Blade teams, that he is going to absolutely be necessary if you want to bring those characters to the next level. If you care about alt-based teams, but specifically we're going to be talking about Acheron. Acheron, with him, Acheron becomes a completely different unit. Completely different unit. Now, I know, as someone who has used Acheron since her release, we've had the rug pulled from underneath us multiple times. You pulled Zhao Q, fell off. You pulled Cypher, fell off. He is the real deal. This is what I have been looking for my Acheron for years. He is what I've been looking for. And that's the reason why I'm going to get him at E2. There's a reason why I stopped at E0S0 for Zhao Q, and there's a reason why I stopped at E0S1 for Cypher. I'm E2ing this man. If you care about your Acheron teams, you must pull this dude. It's got to happen. Now, allegedly, Zhao Q is supposed to be getting a Nova Flare. Even with that being the case, he is still going to be better. I am 100% confident in that assertion. Now, normally I would say, well, I can't be 100% certain. there's always going to be a 0.1% margin of error. No, I'm very confident that he's going to be better. I've looked at the numbers, I've looked at the charts. He is so far beyond damn near every universal option in the game that not pulling him is, I don't even know like how you could justify not pulling him, aside from like you just don't have the money or you don't have the resources. That's how good he is. I'm just being honest. For Feixiao, amazing. He is also what I've been looking for. He's everything that I've been wanting for years since her release. Everything I wanted. Because I didn't believe in Tribbie. And I kind of believed in Ashveil, but not enough to spend my resources on him. I believe in him. Beyond both of them. That's why I'm E2ing him. If you are interested in the Mono-Remembrance split, you have all the members of Remembrance, right? This guy is good for even fucking Castorice. Is he better than Cyrene? No. N-Blade can be used in place of Cyrene in some teams, but he is not going to be replacing Cyrene in the majority of teams that she is currently the best in slot for. That's just not how that's going to go down, right? So, if you're interested in the Mono-Rem split with Castorice, you can use Castorice and Blade, a flex slot, meaning Tribbie, Ruan Mei, Cypher, you get the point, Silverwolf, and then Hyacine, and then the other side of split would be Evernight, Cyrene, a flex slot, which would basically be any of the other characters that I just listed, with your final slot. Well, I would say for that flex slot, that's most likely going to be taken by the Remembrance Trailblazer, specifically because he enables DPS Cyrene even more. So that's what those two teams would look like. Outside of that, he is going to be definitive best in slot, as I already said, for follow-up. So the expected team for him is going to be with Ashveil, this new follow-up DPS, plus him, and maybe a new follow-up sustain. I hope that they don't make another one and just instead buff what we already have. That would make more sense. So yeah, there's just a lot of places that you can use him. If you are a newer player and you are just looking for a really strong universal option, you can't really go wrong with this guy. And if you are going to be getting him, again, I would recommend that you get him at E1. You can stop at E0, but if you want to use him, far into the future without having to run into a bunch of issues with uptime and all that other jazz, just get his E1. It really is that simple. All right. So next is going to be Cyrene. Of these three, I still think that Cyrene is the highest value here. There are going to be plenty of people who are going to disagree with that sentiment. But the reason why I'm going to put her beyond those two is very simply put, because outside of her amping ability, she also has high DPS potential. So, from that standpoint, if you own Evernight and you own Cyrene, you effectively have a team that can clear any content in the game. Just those two units. Because the Remembrance Trailblazer is free. And even if you decided, okay, well, I'm not going to use the Remembrance Trailblazer because I'm using the Elation Trailblazer or the Harmony Trailblazer or whatever you're using him for. You can slot in Ruan Mei if you would like. You can slot HuoHuo into those teams. You can slot E2 Robin into those teams. You can slot Tribbie into those teams. And she will perform at a high level. Again, you don't have to take my word for it. I literally have gameplay showcasing this. It's not something that's up for debate. But as I've said once, and I will say again, if you guys want to continue to believe those players who do all this waffling, all this typing, instead of actually showing you gameplay showcases, that's on you. That has nothing to do with me, right? I'm doubling down with Cyrene. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get E2 Cyrene. I'm also going to get E2 Blade. Going to test him with the Mono-Rem split and all that other jazz. But regardless, due to the fact that not only is Cyrene a good amper, but she is also a great DPS, I am putting her above these two. That's the reason why she's in the middle. The one thing that these two don't have that she has is that she can be used as a main DPS. And for that reason, she is beyond these two. I don't think that main DPS Mordenax is going to take fire or catch on in the community. Most people are going to continue to use him as a sub-DPS. And as a sub-DPS, he is a should pull. But there's a reason why I'm not rating him as a main DPS. Because I don't expect him to be main DPS worthy compared to what's going to be coming out in the future. That's the other reason why I'm not putting Ashveil in tier 0 as a main DPS. I would put Cyrene as a main DPS and address her as such, but the reason why I can't is because the average player doesn't use her as a main DPS. Every time someone looks at Cyrene, they treat her as either a sub-DPS or an amplifier. And I have to remain consistent with the average consensus, even if I don't agree with it. That's the perspective. So I'm going to rate her as an amplifier because that's what Pridewin has her rated as. And that's what the majority of players use her as. But I think because of her potential, she is beyond those three. So TLDR, if you are interested in Elation or you already have invested in Elation, you must pull Yao Guang. Otherwise, you skip her. If you need a strong general amplifier that is beyond Tribbie, and or you're investing in your Acheron or your follow-up units, you pull Mordenax Blade. If you are looking for an upscale for effectively all the Chrysalis heirs in the game, except for maybe, what, 2 of them at E0? So that would be Phainon, who doesn't have good synergy with her at E0. Is there anyone else? No, sorry, it's just one. It's just Phainon. That's the only place where the synergy is questionable. But if you get E2 Cyrene and you already have E2 Phainon, then you're going to pop off. I think if you have E2 Phainon, though, you don't necessarily need Cyrene. I haven't seen data that suggests that. Usually at E2, his best performing teams is actually with Cerydra. and either a Sunday or someone else. Cyrene is splashed in there every once in a while. But with all the other main DPS, meaning My Day, Anaxa, who was supposed to be a sub-DPS, but is a better main DPS than Herta, weirdly enough. Aglaya, Castorice, Evernight. Also an upscale for Hyacine to allow her to do more damage. With all those characters, you should be pulling Cyrene. Triple must pull for different reasons for these three, but I still think that Cyrene has the highest value of the three. Next, for the sub-DPS, I have moved both Argenti and Topaz and Numby to luxury. As I said, I heard that both of these guys are going to be getting a Nova Flare, so their value has gone up slightly. Also, with the existence of Morgan X Blade, they have improved slightly, but it's not enough for me to high recommend them. So, low, just to reflect them improving in value, but I'm not going beyond that until I actually see what these Nova Flares look like. For Rin and Gilgamesh, I'm putting them both in comfort pool for the time being. Like I said, I want to see what the kits look like before I go any further beyond that. Because I actually know what Morgan X Blade does. I know where he slots. I know where he's going to be good. I can definitively say that he is a should pull. I can't say the same for characters that I haven't seen the kits of yet. But I do think that they're going to be good. So in order to provide that middle ground, I have them both in comfort pool. To be adjusted once I have the full kits for both. For Blade, luxury pool. Like I said, I think Morgan X Blade is going to improve his standing a bit and give him more value, especially with more Eidolons. Before, even with the Eidolons, no, not really, right? But with the existence of this new Blade, he should get an improvement. I'm not saying it's going to be the most massive improvement. It's not going to, make him immediately meta or anything, but he will be much better than what he is currently. So, low AV for him. For Archer and Saber, we're putting them in comfort for the time being until, again, I need to see those two kits before I move them up. Just to be clear. We have Seele as well, of course. She is still doing pretty well. But if things change, we'll downgrade her pool viability. And we have Phainon. Now, I'm sure, like I said, Phainon mains are not going to be happy about this positioning. The reason why is because until you get to his E2, he's kind of mid. I'm just being real. Compared to the base power level of Evernight and Castorice, he's just not that great. Just being honest. Right? Of course, like those two units, they require other units in order to reach their full potential, and he is no different. But the major difference is that even when you give him his best unit at E0, which would be Cerydra, they're still not outperforming how Castorice and Evernight will perform with each other. Or with Hyacine. Just not, right? And that's because of the nature of how his kit was designed. Him booting units off of his team, it looks cool on its face, but it has not helped him long term from a lower Eidolon investment. Now, if you like Phainon and you care about Phainon and you already have him at E0, you already have him at E1, I would highly recommend that you get his E2. He becomes a completely different unit at E2. He becomes significantly stronger at E2 and gets much closer to units like Castorice and Evernight at that level, without question. He will continue to perform well at that level. Do I think it's worth it for me personally to high recommend that everybody pull for an E2 Phainon? Of course not. Because for the average player, going to E2 is a pretty steep investment. It is. That's the reason why units like, for example, Moranax Blade, I can still high recommend that unit because even at E0, he's really, really good. But for Phainon, at E0, no. Very mediocre unit at E0. So, if you're going to go to E2, high recommend if you care about Phainon. Otherwise, your Phainon is going to struggle. Only the top 5%, 5 to 10% of Phainon users can use E0 Phainon at a high level. The overwhelming majority of you are not, statistically. I didn't come up with the data, I didn't make it up. That's just the way it is. And unfortunately, because HoYoverse despises the fact that people compare the potential of these units, because if you start doing that, then they make that information available, then people are going to use that to tell others to not pull for these characters at all, to be optimal with their funds, and use them for those that are, without question, meta at the highest level. It's the reason why HoYoverse didn't want people comparing Silverwolf without shield to other finished archetypes like the Remembrance, for example. Although that was just a rumor. So in this case, at E0, can't high recommend. At E1, still can't high recommend. At E2, he jumps to a should pull, but because overall he doesn't have a strong base, that's the reason why I'm putting him in comfort pool. Hope that makes sense. Moving on. The last unit that I'm going to be placing is Nova Himeko. I think that she's going to be a should pull. And my reasoning for that is because it's expected that she is going to be a main push. And because she is going to do well with, DHPT in a way that's actually meaningful. I know that DHPT works with Phainon, but he prefers to run sustainless. So that's a whole nother conversation. And also, because we expect that Sunday is going to be Nova Flared, I think that her potential is going to be very high. Also, weirdly enough, if one of the things that she specializes in is ultimate damage, then she'll also do very well in Moranax Blade, which will make her potential even higher. Of course, in a sustainless scenario, you can use Moranax Blade with Phainon as well. Like, you could take Tribbie out that team and put Moranax Blade in there. But because it's kind of suspicious, that synergy, the only thing that Blade will be doing on Phainon's team is providing an amp. You can't provide any follow-up attacks while he's in his ult. It basically makes half of Moranax Blade's kit useless, which is the same problem between him and Cyrene, because half of Cyrene's kit, well, I wouldn't say half of it, I'll say like a quarter of her kit becomes useless because she can't do any damage. At a high level, you would like to use Cyrene with a DPS slant instead of just using her as an amplifier. You can't do that while Phainon is in his ultimate because he's the only person that can attack, which reduces his overall potential even higher. All they would have to do to make Phainon better is stop him from kicking his teammates out. He becomes a massively better unit overnight. But going back to Himeko Nova, because I don't expect for her to do that, I expect her to be similar to Phainon. I don't think that she's going to boot everyone off the team because that would be antithetical to her as a character. So, assuming that she's going to have high synergy with the Astro Express members, and I mean all of them, she'll have synergy with all of them, obviously with different varying levels of strength. I think that she's going to be really good. And if her best partners either got a Nova Flare or are getting a Nova Flare, then she's going to be insanely powerful. I'm most likely going to be pulling her as well. Again, I know. I'm talking about pulling a lot of characters and I'm a free-to-play player. I will explain later. Just not in this video. So with all that said, this is going to be the final list for pull value, account value. This is the pull tier list. I think that this is pretty fair to everyone involved. And this is going to be the general tier list for the standard in-game modes, which I also think is plenty fair to everyone involved. As always, if you have any questions or any criticisms about what I say here, I am more than fine justifying any of my opinions to anyone who asks. I responded to a ton of comments in my other video giving my personal opinion, but as always, I am not going to sit here and pretend like I am right about everything and that I am an expert at every single character in the game and all of their archetypes. I'm just not, because first off, not a theory crafter or a guide maker, but I don't own all of these characters. Obviously, I own a good number of them, and I base my opinion off of what I've seen from data, what I've seen from showcases, and what I have listened to from the best theory crafters and guide makers in the world. I'm basically an aggregator of sorts. Simultaneously, though, the way that I view some of these characters is completely different from those guide makers and theory crafters, which is the reason why, as an example, I valued Cyrene much higher than some of those theory crafters when they thought that Tribbie was going to be beyond her. Simultaneously, I have made mistakes and I thought that Dot wasn't going to be a top 4 archetype, and I ended up being wrong. No one person should be your source for information, and you should not base all of your opinions off of one content creator. If you do that, you're a fool. I will tell you that. You're a fool. And even content creators now, we're all should be all on the same page. You should not want everybody listening to you alone. Any person that actually cares about seeking out the truth, that actually cares about giving the best takes possible and allowing people to take in information from as many people as possible, would recommend that you branch out and look at other content creators and get their opinions on it before you make a final determination. I am a player first and a content creator second. I don't get paid for this. I don't make any money off of this. I don't have any sponsors. There are people who think I have some sort of secret agenda. If I had some secret agenda, I would continue to have my Robin and Ruan Mei up in Trailblazer tier. I demoted them. I thought that Dot wasn't going to be as good as it was. Obviously, I changed my perspective after looking at gameplay and looking at data. I put them all in tier 0. My favorite DPS are Feixiao and Acheron. I have them in tier 1. So if somebody is going to try to convince you, I'm sure outside of my comment section or in somewhere else, whether it be Reddit, Twitter, whatever the fuck, that I have these secret agendas, I'm telling you they're full of shit. Anybody who's been listening to me for a long period of time knows that my opinions on a lot of these characters has shifted over time because I have taken in new information. Those that have quote-unquote hidden agendas wouldn't start shifting their opinions over time and adjusting them once new information is available to them. That doesn't make any sense. If I had an agenda, I would double and triple down on everything, regardless of whether or not it made sense or not, which I clearly don't do. The only units that I have double and triple down on is Mono-Remembrance, because it's been the consistent top 1 non-shield team in every single mode for longer than 6 months. Period. And you can go on Prywin if you were observing Prywin average player data. Again, I don't particularly care about the tier list. I just do that part for fun. If you look at the actual clearance data, you will see that across the board, this has been the top 1 team in the game. And only recently have they been challenged due to the existence of Elation and the fact that it's being shielded in this patch. For all the people that wanted this team to fall off and to be power crept into oblivion, I'm sorry to let you know that even at the highest level, this team is still doing great. Just because you can't replicate it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. Just like the average player matters, and this is something that bothers me, is that we have two, it seems like we're operating off of 2 different sects within the community. We have our top 10% players who don't care about the average player or the casual player. And then we got the average and casual player who doesn't care about what the top 10% are doing. You need both in order to have a balanced and healthy discussion about these units. You cannot have anything close to objectivity about these characters unless you take in the opinions of both. That's what I do. Some people don't like me for that reason. Some people do. But the more that I talk, the more subs that I gain, so somebody cares about this somewhere. That's all I want to say. Agree, disagree, I don't care. If you like the content, if you think it was insightful, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. But that's all for me. Your boy Scrub Hero R's is out.
Hidden my strength aside, my grief and sorrow. Keeping the light on in the dark place was a pain. Been trying to be the best, it's been a war within. Losing, but I felt like I was born to win. I was born to win, I was born to be great. The sun